think beyond question, you would have to look at organizations that felt the most disappointed and sad about how 2024 played out, how their fan bases felt about it, and just overall projections and expectations. It was the San Francisco 49ers. It was a major disappointment for them. Super Bowl losers curse certainly felt like it ran strong with them last year, because they had injuries all over the place. And yeah, like, injuries happen. They're a part of the game, and that's part of the challenge of the NFL in a salary cap era in a 17-game regular season. You've got to have some fucking depth, right? And if you don't have enough depth and you get too many injuries to too many important notable guys in key spots, like, eventually those chickens are going to come home to fucking roost. And you're going to have problems. And that's what the San Francisco 49ers did. And I think part of that is because of kind of their star system over the years, where they've had a number of really big name stars, but as those stars miss time due to injuries, it just further exposes the lack of depth that is kind of a natural byproduct of how much they have invested in a certain set of number of players. So they certainly limped in through the rest of the year, finished 6-11, last in the NFC West, and notably they were 2-7 after the bye week. So 4-4 heading into the bye, where maybe you feel like they still have a chance even though they've got injuries. But yeah, you could go through the laundry list of all the injuries they had last year. It was wild, but you know, that's an excuse at some point. You got to figure out a way, and they just didn't get it done. So they fired their defensive coordinator. They bring back Robert Saleh. He's back to lead the defense, back home, if you will, where he had certainly some success as the defensive coordinator of this 49ers team several years back. That's got to be a godsend for this organization, because they know that they've got somebody competent leading their defense that was really, really bad last year. Injuries or not, it was a bad unit. And you reach this point in time now where they had to make the big decision. You knew this was coming. I still think it's wild. I still can't believe they did it. They gave Brock Purdy a 5-year, $265 million contract with $180 million plus guaranteed. That is a shit ton of money to pay a non-elite quarterback. And I realize that's kind of the going price for average to above average starters even now. But God, that is a lot of fucking money. A lot. And while it doesn't necessarily manifest immediately in terms of the size of the cap tip and the impact associated with it, at some point it will. And you just look at a Brock Purdy type and you say, is he an all-star type of point guard if we're using a basketball reference? Or is he more of a solid guy, a Brian Shaw type that can distribute it everywhere, but like he's not going to carry your team, an Andre Miller type, those types of guys, right? That's what he feels more like. So to pay that much money to a guy, ugh, yeah. They were probably in a spot where they had made their choice and were going to eventually do it and had to do it and didn't have a choice but to do it, but better than me is all I will say. While they kept Brock Purdy, they bring back Robert Saleh. They had lots of roster turnover. Gone are all of these guys. Talanoa Hufanga, Dre Greenlaw. They traded away Deebo Samuel. Charvarius Ward is gone. Jordan Mason was traded. Jalen Moore is gone. Aaron Banks is gone. Javon Hargrave, Leonard Floyd. So both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, several notable players are gone. Although if you look at the case of a Javon Hargrave, like how much did he really play or contribute or matter in the grand scheme of things anyways? Maybe a similar conversation for Dre Greenlaw here recently. Hufanga certainly had some great moments, but has he been that great the past year or two? I don't know about all that. When you look at Deebo Samuel and it's like, okay, they got rid of him, but they still have Brandon Ayuk. They have Jawan Jennings, and they just spent a first-round pick on Ricky Pearsall. They were in a spot where they could probably afford to do that and won't be all that noticeable to them. And instead of creating some dependencies for how they get Deebo manufactured touches in their offense, they can figure out other ways to get other guys involved. But when you talk about Brandon Ayuk, he's not going to be there to start the season due to injury. We'll see how long he is ultimately out for. But they're certainly going to want him back for sure, because he's a guy that can be a star for them. When you got to the NFL draft, not surprisingly, off the heels of that really pathetic defensive performance in 2024, they placed a heavy emphasis on defense. They drafted Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins and C.J. West for their defensive front. They're going to want to get after it. Mykel Williams in particular, they're looking at him as a high upside athlete, edge rusher type. They drafted Nick Martin for the linebacking core, Upton Stout for the secondary. So those 5 picks right there showed that this team understood they had to get better on defense. And this is a really good example to me, quick side note or tangent. When you have everybody try to tell you, well, these teams always draft best player available, that's bullshit. A lot of teams will draft what they deem as the best player available at a position of need, whether it's an immediate need or a need 1 or 2 years down the road. But don't pretend like need isn't a fucking factor. Because if need wasn't a factor at some point in time, 1 or 2 of those picks would have been on the offensive side of the ball. They weren't. This team drafted for need, and that might be okay. As we get to this roster and where they're at now with all the turnover and all the changes, what can you still like about them, or where are the question marks? I look at them offensively. It's a running game where they averaged over 5 yards a carry last year, whether it was Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, Isaac Guerrero. This is a team that's going to be able to run the ball. Certainly will help that they have Christian McCaffrey healthy, because again, that's another one of those big stars that they invested a ton of money in. But I presume and assume reasonably so, understandably so, this team's going to be really good when you talk about running the ball. Even with the departure of like a Deebo Samuel from the mix, this is still a really good receiving group. George Kittle, stud. They just re-upped him to a contract extension. A healthy Brandon Ayuk, stud. Jawan Jennings certainly has his moments of studly play. Ricky Pearsall, former first-round pick. Then you throw Christian McCaffrey into that mix. There are plenty of weapons in that offense for Brock Purdy for sure. Then you look at Kyle Shanahan's play calling, especially in non-clutch situations, especially when you're not talking about when the game's on the line in the playoffs or the Super Bowl. He's one of the best, right? He really, truly is. He gets the most out of his guys. Fantastic play caller. Fantastic in terms of game design. It's just that when shit gets to get, he fucks up and face plants time after time. And then you look at the defensive side of the ball, and they still have MAGA Nick Bosa and Fred Warner. Those are their 2 kind of real defensive anchors and cornerstones. And a lot of teams would love to have those 2 guys as their kind of defensive cornerstones. But they're going to need to be cornerstones and more this season for this team, with a lot of changes on their defense, which transitions me over to what I'm concerned about or what question marks I have about their team. Their secondary, I certainly think, is vulnerable. They lost Tafanga. They lost Charvarius Ward. It was already a unit that performed poorly last year, and now you lose a couple of pieces. Yeah, good luck with all that. Their pass rush, yes, you've got Nick Bosa, but there's a reason they were drafting Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins and C.J. West. They're trying to find other guys they can get after the quarterback, period. So outside of Nick Bosa, it's a concern, and it could be a real problem for them this year, a lack of overall pass rush. And then you look at the special teams. You formerly spent, a 3rd-round pick on Jake Moody, and he hit 70% of his field goals? Not good. Got to tighten that shit up, bro, because otherwise the NFL is going to stand not for long when you're missing that many damn kicks. And then you look at Brock Purdy. He is not a scrub by any stretch of the imagination. He is a good NFL starting quarterback for sure. But is he the type of guy that you want to make that type of investment in? Is he the type of guy that can ultimately put a team on his back and carry them to the promised land? I think he's shown already that no, he's not. He can be good, and he can be that kind of distributing type of Andre Miller type of point guard, right? But he's not going to be that superstar type of point guard quarterback. I just can't see it. He doesn't have the physical tools there, and his mental tools aren't so elite like, let's say, a Joe Burrow, where Joe Burrow makes up for the fact that his arm isn't the strongest, but he's pretty much great at every fucking thing else. Brock Purdy's not. As you look at the schedule for this team, you look at the first 4 weeks, a chance for the 49ers to get out the gate kind of strong. They do have a road game week 1 against Seattle, so key divisional matchup to start. But then the next 3 games, at New Orleans, hosting Arizona, and then Jacksonville. I give you the 49ers, you want to at least get off to a 3-1 start there. And if you do, you're developing some confidence and you're getting yourself some good momentum as you go to the last 3 quarters of the season. And then weeks 5 through 7, a couple of road games in there against teams that should be looking to vie for the playoffs. The Rams on the road, the Bucks on the road, and then Atlanta at home. Again, another stretch of schedule, those 3 games. You'd really, really love to be 2-1. And you'd really love those 2 wins, if you could only have 2 wins, to be against the Rams and the Falcons. And then you look at weeks 12 through 15. There's another opportunity here for me, for the 49ers to get in a little mini run. They host Carolina, then they go to Cleveland, got a bye week there in week 14, and then they host Tennessee. Those should all be 3 should be viewed as winnable games, because those are not good teams for the most part, right? Tennessee is going to be improved. I think Carolina will be a little improved, but in general, those are teams with the so-called stars that and superstars that the 49ers have. They should be able to beat those teams pretty convincingly. So if you look at those three kind of key stretches of schedule that I called out, let's say they go 3-1 weeks 1 through 4, 2-1 in weeks 5 through 7, and win those three games weeks 12 through 15, right? Now you're talking about what, 8-2 just in that 10 games that I mentioned. You really only got to win another 2 or 3 games to at least lock up a wild card, if not win this division. And I think that's basically what's going to happen here. Every year, for the most part, it feels like you have a team or two that goes from worst to first. And last year, the 49ers were the worst in this division. I think they're well coached enough and they've got enough talent and they've at least got a solid enough quarterback where they can get back to being the best team in this division as long as they stay healthy. So I'm assuming they're going to stay a little bit healthier this year, which could be a big assumption at this point. But I think they'll go 11-5. They'll win the division and have a chance to maybe win a playoff game or two.